is we're going to kind of move on now to back to walls, all right? And as I mentioned before at the beginning of the lecture, is that where you have the ability to make a couple different types of walls, is stackable walls being one and curtain walls being the other, all right? And so we're going to get into those now, which are a little more detailed with the walls, but again, there's aspects of Revit that you can do, and so we'll get into those, all right? So I'm going to hit escape and cancel out of my window tool here. I'm going to go to my architecture tab. Okay, and under the wall tool, all right, we're going to click on architectural, right, to get into our wall. All right. Now, under properties with the type selector, if we scroll all the way down here to the bottom, all right, you'll probably notice that you have types for a curtain wall, okay, and you also have types for stacked wall. All right. The first thing we'll get into is stacked wall. All right. So if you click on this stacked wall type, right, this says brick over CMU with metal stud. Okay, in terms of the instance properties, right, these instance properties are going to be the exact same as our regular wall types. Okay, essentially what a stacked wall is Revit goes and takes two of our regular wall types, all right, and it stacks the two of them together. So if you can think of the exterior of a building, right, is sometimes you'll see a building where, from the ground floor to second floor, there's stone, all right, and then all the floors above that, there's brick above it. All right, what using a stacked wall allows you to do is make a wall type that has multiple materials like that. All right, and instead of building one wall type and modeling it, going from floor 1 to floor 2, all right, and then modeling another wall type that sits on top of that one, and goes from floor 2 all the way up to the top. All right, Revit allows you to make a wall type that has both of those already built into it, and lets you model it once that goes the full height. Okay, so with our stacked wall here, like I said, is the instance properties very similar to our regular walls when we're modeling them. But if we click on edit type to go into the type properties, right, the structure you'll see is the only thing that's available to be changed. Okay, and over here in the preview, right, you'll see what this wall actually looks like. So if we click on edit for structure, right, you'll see that it looks a little bit different. Okay, if we make this a little bit bigger, right, instead of choosing each individual layer that goes into it, all right, you're basically choosing which wall types you're making this stacked wall out of. Okay, so if you're going to be using the stacked wall, right, you have to make sure that in the wall types you already have a wall created with the layers that you want to use. Right, so in this case, this stacked wall is using the exterior CMU on metal stud, right, for the base, and then on top of it, it's stacking the exterior brick on metal stud, right, above it. So as you can see here underneath, as you select each one of these wall types, right, it highlights which one it is. So this one here on the bottom. Okay, and so you can see if you use the drop down, you can change this to any one of the wall types that you have created in your model already. Okay, so before you go into your stack wall, make sure that you create a wall type that you want to go and use in your stacked wall. Okay. Now, aside from the name and choosing which wall type you're going to use, is the height. So you'll see here that the bottom one is set at 3 feet, and the one above it is set at variable. Okay, and so with the stacked wall, this is kind of the layout that always needs to be used. With a stacked wall, is that one of the layers, all right, always has to be variable, right? So what that means is that if you look at it, all right, this bottom one here has a height of 3 feet. So that means for the first bottom to 3 feet, it's going to be this wall, right? The top one is variable, which means that, right, after 3 feet, it's going to go with the brick on metal stud wall, and variable because whatever height this wall ends up being, it'll fill with this brick on metal stud. So if this wall is 10 feet tall, right, it'll fill it up with this brick on metal stud wall type. Right, if it's 20 feet tall, it doesn't matter. This CMU on metal stud is only going to go up 3 feet, and then the rest of it is going to be this brick on metal stud. Okay, so again, depending on the makeup of your wall or anything like that, all right, at least one of these layers has to be variable. Okay, and then you can adjust the height to whatever it may need to be, right, for your other layers. Okay, you can see that you have the insert, all right, and delete, so you can add additional wall types in here. So if in between it you wanted to add something, oh, that's already there, but you wanted to add a different wall type into here, all right, just to add a little more detail and a little bit more of a variation. All right, you can add as many wall types in here as you'd like. All right, again, changing the heights of them and at least making sure that one of the wall types is variable. All right, so in this case, you can see if this one here is supposed to be the variable one, you can click on variable. Right, that changes that layer to it, and you can adjust the height of the other ones below it. Okay. Offset, as you can see here, is you can offset this basically either forward or backwards in the wall construction. Where right now they're all set at 0, right? That means they're all lining up perfectly with the core line and the center line of the walls. All right, that core center line, as you can see on the top here with offset, that's where these kind of come into play. So to know where the core center line is of each wall type, okay, this is when it starts to get a little bit more important, right? Because if we pick wall center line instead, right, you'll see that basically it goes to the center of each wall and kinds of lines them up, as opposed to if we had a core center line, depending on where the core is defined in your wall, all right, that kind of lines the cores up of all of your walls instead, all right? So again, when you're doing it something like a stack wall, knowing where the core of your wall is as opposed to the center line of the finishes and the overall center line of your wall, that becomes important when you're doing your stacked walls. Okay, and so your offset value, if for some reason you wanted to offset this either forward or backwards, right, you can do that and type in a value, right? You'll see in the section here that it goes and it actually offsets that forward or backwards. Okay, pushes that back. Right, the top and the base, you'll notice you can't change because these are going to be adjusted based on the height of the wall itself when you model it. All right, this checkbox here to flip. So basically, you can flip the construction of that around. Right, so you can see, oh, it changes it and flips itself to the other direction. Right, so if for some reason it comes in backwards, you can flip that around. Okay, and obviously you can see here too with the ups and downs, you can change where each one of these wall types moves to. So either up, top, bottom, things like that. Okay. But again, for the most part with the stacked wall, you have to make sure that you have these wall types already created, right, to be able to actually add it in here for the stacked wall. Okay. So I'm going to hit cancel for now, and I'm just going to leave this as is. All right. Again, with this in the stacked walls, is if you're going to change any of the settings here in the structure, whether it's the heights of things or whether it's the wall types that it's making up, make sure that you click on duplicate. All right. Very important to do that so you don't screw up any of the other walls you may have modeled. Okay, and we'll go ahead and hit OK. All right, and these walls are modeled the same exact way your other walls are modeled. Right, as you go ahead and set base constraint, top constraint, click, and you can model that one wall there. All right, so it'll look a little bit different because that bottom section's a little bit wider. Okay, but we'll take a look at this in 3D in a minute. All right. So that's how you can model your stacked wall. All right. So before we get into curtain walls here, all right, is we'll go ahead and we're going to open up a new kind of view. All right. So at this point, as you probably don't have a 3D view open or you don't have a 3D view created. All right, but we're going to open a 3D view just so we can kind of navigate around it and see our building in a little bit of a different view. All right, so to create a 3D view, there's a couple different ways. Either on the very top here, if you have the options on the bar, is this little house key where it says default 3D view. You can either click that, all right, and that will create a default view for you. Or if you go to the View tab, you can click on the little house here, right, and create a default 3D view. So what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and create a 3D view for us. In a project browser, you'll see that there's now a drop down here for 3D view. Right, so that's your default 3D view. Okay, and we should now be able to look and see our 3D view here. All right, now navigation-wise in here, right, your scroll wheel still zoom in and out. All right, click and hold and it pans back and forth. All What you also have in 3D view, okay, is if you hold down the shift key, all right, and then click and hold your middle mouse button, right, it allows you to orbit around your 3D view, all right, so not just panning, but it allows you to orbit yourself around, okay. So again, if you hold the shift key and then hold down the middle mouse button, okay, it'll allow you to orbit yourself around the 3D model. Okay, all right. If you don't like doing that and you'd rather orbit around using something else, as you should notice in your top right here, is you have the view cube. All right, so you can kind of click and hold on this and drag it around, and it'll allow you to orbit and pivot your building. All right. Alternately, if you click on little parts of the cube, right, Revit will go and orient the view to whatever section of the cube that is. All right. But again, completely up to you on how you want to navigate around the model and what's comfortable for you. All right. So if you zoom in here, right, this is our stacked wall that we just modeled. So the bottom of it was the CMU, right, the top is the brick, right, those are the windows and doors that we've placed in there, okay. But again, just giving us another way to kind of view our model, all right. If you click and select the stacked wall, right, and then you right click on it, right, you'll notice you get some options. You actually have the option on the top here to break it up. So if you click break up, what that does is it now actually splits the two of these into the two individual wall types. So it's no longer a stacked wall, it just happens to be the two wall types on top of each other, right? So it's no longer one single element, it's two separate elements, okay? So you can break that up if you want to, or you can keep it kind of as one whole stacked wall, again, depending on how you want to do it and how your workflow goes for you, all right? One thing that I want to show you guys as well, and that I personally like doing from time to time, is once you have things modeled out here in a 3D view, is what I'll usually do is I'll usually hit window tile up here. All right, so if you go to view and do tile, right, this will tile any of your open views. All right, what I like about this is that you can actually go in multiple views at the same time. All right, is if you click down in your plan view and you select this wall, for example, right, you see that wall highlight in every one of your views you have open, okay? And so if you do a modification to it here, all right, in the plan view, let's say you drag the end of that, all right, you'll see it update in your 3D view, you'll see it update in your elevation as well, all right? And the reason why I like having multiple views open and kind of tiled like this at the same time is, especially when you're not used to using Revit, is it keeps your mind in, keeps your mind kind of reminded that, you know, when you're moving something in a plan view, right, you're not just working in a plan view, or you're not just working in 2D, you're also working with the 3D model, and you're also working in the elevation. So as you change something in your plan view here, right, is it not only affects it on the plan, it affects it 3D, and it affects it in your elevation, all right? So again, it keeps you in the mindset that you're making changes to a model, and you're kind of making changes to this, you know, large organic project, as opposed to just a plan view or just an elevation view or something like that, okay? And it also gives you a little bit more of a perspective on, you know, if you change this wall around a bit, how does it look in 3D or elevation or something like that, okay? So again, it's up to you on whether or not you want to have multiple views open at the same time, but like I said, is sometimes I like to do it, especially as I start to get more and more modeled in here, so that way visually I can see, you know, how it's going in 3 dimensions as well, instead of just looking at it in a plan. All right. Okay, so now that we've done stack walls, right, we're going to go and move on to curtain walls. All right. Now, curtain walls in Revit happens to be one of those subjects that is a little bit trickier to get for some people, just because it's based on a grid. Okay, and so getting the idea of, you know, a wall that's based on a grid, and, you know, adjusting the grid and changing everything out, all right, it takes a little bit sometimes to pick up and get used to, right? So I would recommend that, you know, rewatch this video, and especially the curtain wall section, all right, to kind of make sure that you understand how the curtain walls work and how you adjust them and things like that, okay? Now under the architecture tab, all right, if we go back into our wall tool, all right, and if we drop our selector down, okay, is you'll see under curtain wall you have 3 different types that are set up here, right? You have curtain wall 1, you have exterior glazing, and you have storefront, right? Now these are basically all, essentially all curtain walls, but they have different settings set up for them, all right? And for purposes of what we're going to go over here, I recommend let's click on the storefront type, all right, just because this has the most settings already done for us, all right? So it's a little bit easier to show you guys how it goes, okay? Obviously, you can use the curtain wall type or the, the other wall type there, the exterior glazing. But like I said, I prefer to start with the storefront because it's a little bit easier for demonstration purposes, okay? So with the curtain wall, okay, you can see that, the instance properties are exactly the same as our regular wall type on the top here, right? So the constraints for top constraint and base constraint, right? Where you'll notice they get a little bit different is as you scroll down, you'll see vertical grid and horizontal grid, okay? Right now we're gonna leave these alone, all right, but we'll go through them in a second here, all right? As you scroll down here, okay, you can see that you have the normal options available to you as well, all right? Now, as I mentioned before when we, at the beginning when I first kind of mentioned curtain walls, is that in Revit, what Revit considers a curtain wall is basically a wall that is based on a grid system, okay? And basically Revit goes and places a curtain wall. You decide, what that grid system is going to be, the spacing of it. You decide what's going on those grids, whether they're mullions, whether they're just blank spaces, right? You decide what the panels are going to be. So the panels on a curtain wall are considered the spaces in between the grids. Okay, so whether or not it's going to be glass, whether it's going to be a solid panel, whether it's going to be wide open, okay, whether it's going to be a door. What you can also do with Revit and curtain walls is instead of just your typical glass and things that you would expect to be inside a curtain wall, right, is, if we think of a curtain wall in a building, instead of just glass, you can actually take any of your wall types and you can put them inside of that panel, right? So for instance, if we wanted to take these exterior walls that we have modeled here, that's, the brick on the metal stud and all of that, and we actually wanted to put it inside one of the panels for a curtain wall, we could technically do that, right? Now, obviously, in real life you wouldn't do that, but the fact of the matter is that Revit allows you to put basically any sort of wall type inside of those panels, right? And I'll explain a little bit later, why that's important and how that can be very useful, on larger scale projects, right? But for now, we're just going to get into, a very basic curtain wall and how we can kind of adjust it and change, our settings for, a very basic curtain wall. All right, so now that we have our curtain wall selected, okay, we have storefront, we're going to go ahead and hit edit type, all right? So when we're in our type properties, all right, this is where we're going to kind of set up our curtain wall and our grid, okay? So as I mentioned, the curtain wall, it's based off of a grid system, okay? On the top, you can see function. So the function here works the same way as the regular walls that we've modeled, right? So it doesn't really matter what you set it for here. If you're getting into that kind of level of detail, by all means, set this to, the actual use of the wall. If you don't set it and leave it as exterior, it's going to be perfectly fine. It's going to still model the same way, right? This checkbox here for automatically embed, right, is I recommend keeping this checked. I'll show you once we model this what embedding a curtain wall does, all right, and how you can actually do that. All right, but like I said, I recommend keeping this checked. All right, the curtain panel, all right, this is kind of the default panel that's going to go into your curtain wall, right? In this case, it's system panel glazed, right? So it's going to put in a glazed curtain panel, piece of glass, all right, by default. Again, I'm going to keep this as is, but you can use the drop down here and change it if you need to, all right? You'll notice that you can actually change and, put in all these different types of walls, all right? All the wall types you have selected. So if for some reason you want it to be a wall type instead of a piece of glass, you can change it to that, right? Or you can see just underneath glazed, you have solid or you have empty, all right? But again, this is going to be kind of the default one. So, not if you want to change a couple of panels and kind of as one-off instances, that's fine. But for the most part, this is going to be the default panel. And so I leave this as, the system panel glazed, okay? Now for vertical grid and horizontal grid, all right, this is where we're going to set the settings for how our grid actually gets laid out. Okay. So under vertical grid and horizontal grid, right, you can see that there's layout, there's spacing, and then there's a little checkbox for adjust for mullion size, right? So under layout for vertical grid, if you drop this down here, you can see that you have the option of none, right? So if you didn't want any vertical grid lines, right, you can set it to none. There's fixed distance, fixed number, all right? Then there's maximum spacing and minimum spacing, okay? I recommend that you always choose either fixed distance or fixed number, all right? So fixed distance, obviously, you're gonna tell Revit, I want these vertical grids to be spaced every 6 feet, and it's gonna place a grid at every 6 feet, okay? Fixed number, you're gonna say, okay, Revit, I don't really care how wide or how much space is between these grid lines, but I know that I want this broken up into 4 different spaces, and so you can give it a fixed number, okay? What maximum spacing with minimum spacing do is, maximum spacing, if you select it, all right, is what it does is it says, okay, 5 feet is the maximum spacing that I can go between different grids. So it's gonna take the overall kind of length of your wall, and it's gonna go and space out sections of grid lines, right, based on that 5 feet being the max that it can spread. So, the distance between your grid lines might be a little bit smaller if Revit thinks that, okay, you know what, you can actually maximize more space if you kind of shrink down the distance between the two a little bit. So if you're saying, you want the maximum spacing to be 5 feet, right, the spacing between the two might not be 5 feet, it might be actually a little bit smaller. And more than likely it's going to be a little bit smaller because Revit tries to maximize the space it has for the whole length of your wall. All right. Alternately, the minimum spacing, all right, kind of does the opposite of what the maximum spacing does. So it uses the 5 feet as a minimum spacing. So the spacing between the grid lines is never going to be smaller than 5 feet, right? But either way, both of these settings kind of gets Revit to try and put in as many grid lines as possible within the length of the wall, all right? The only reason I don't like using them is because usually you have a set distance in mind that you want for where your grid lines line up. All right, so that's why either fixed distance or fixed number is probably the best route you want to go with, okay? So in this case, I'm going to set it to fixed distance, right? You can set it to 5 feet, change it to 6 feet, whatever you want, okay? This checkbox for adjust for mullion size, all right? So this basically has to do with on the ends of your walls, all right, whether or not you want the spacing to start kind of like after you take into account the thickness of your mullion or not, all right? In this case, it's not. It's going to start directly at the end of your wall and then go 6 feet, okay? Whether or not you want it to adjust for the mullion size, you can check this on or off, all right? And aside from the vertical grid, the same goes for this horizontal grid as well, all right? As I usually like to keep it a fixed distance, keep the spacing at whatever it is you want, right, for the horizontal grids, right? And again, whether or not you want to adjust the mullion size. Okay, just underneath that, the vertical mullions and horizontal mullions, right? This is where you're actually going to tell Revit, what size, what shape mullions you're going to want to go on these grid lines, all right? In this case, you may or may not have some default ones loaded in here, all right? So for the vertical, all right, you'll see you have an interior type, and then you have a border 1 and border 2, all right? Border 1 and border 2 are going to refer to the very far left part of your wall and the very far right part of your wall. Okay, interior type are all the grid lines in between. So you can change these, again, to be whatever size, shape that you want. You might have some loaded in here already, right? If not, you can go in, again, in the insert tab and load in different mullion types, different mullion sizes, so that you can add additional sizes and shapes in here that you may have. Okay, but you can change here with the vertical mullions and horizontal mullions, all right? Same things go for the both, all right, except these ones are all the vertical ones, these ones are all the horizontal ones, all right. Identity data, just like the regular walls, this is just information that you can put in. It doesn't affect the way that this wall looks when you model it, okay. All right, so that does it for the type properties. So if we go ahead and hit OK, okay, over here in the instance properties, if we scroll down, right? So again, if you look at this, level 1, level 2, all right, set your constraints the same way you would with the regular wall, all right? will notice the difference when you come down to vertical grid and horizontal grid. Right? If you had chosen and told Revit for the spacing that you wanted a certain number, right, or an exact number, you would be able to go and change how many vertical grids and how many horizontal grids you want. All right. In this case, they're grayed out because really it's going to have to do with, you know, how tall your wall is and how wide your wall is, right? So you're not able to do this or change this number on your own because you haven't adjusted for those settings, right? Now for the justification, right, as beginning, and you can see if you drop down here as the end of the center, right, this is basically telling Revit where you want to start the pattern of your grids, right? In this case, the beginning, you know, it'll be the beginning of the wall, so the first spot you click would be the beginning of your wall, the second spot would be the end. So you can see you can change it from beginning to end or have it based directly in the center, all right? Angle, offset, all right, we'll play with these a bit when we actually get this curtain wall down here and modeled, okay? And you'll see that you have the same options for the horizontal grid as well, okay? And so without further ado, is we'll go ahead and just kind of model one of these out here, all right? So we have it going from level 1 to level 2, all right? And we're going to model it the exact same way as we do for a regular wall. So we're going to go ahead, model that there, okay, hit escape. And so we can zoom in, you know, again, you can see it on your 3D view, you can also see it in your elevation, all right? So that's your little curtain wall there. So if you go to your 3D view, all right, I'm going to rotate myself around, all right? Again, if I hold down shift and hold down the middle mouse button, I orbit myself around, all right? So that's your curtain wall that you have there, all right? So again, the spacing between them is the fixed distance that I selected, right? The height is the fixed distance as well. Okay, so I'm going to go and hit escape back out of that tool, or just select the modify arrow, and I'm going to select this curtain wall. Alright, so with it selected, if we go and scroll down here to the instance properties for the horizontal grid and vertical grid, alright, so where it says justification, alright, if I change it from beginning to end, alright, and hit apply, you'll see that the pattern adjusts, alright, so instead of starting on this end and going, you know, the 5 feet, 5 feet, 5 feet, all right, for the spacing. All right, we've gone and changed it to end, so now it goes and starts from the other side, right? Or, like I said, you can set it to center, and it will change the spacing so it starts in the center and goes out, right? Again, it's all going to depend on how you want to space out your curtain wall, right? Angle for the vertical grid here, as you can see, if you change this to something like 15, right, so 15 degrees and hit apply, you can see that your grid actually goes and rotates itself, so it's no longer vertical at 90 degrees. It's rotated a little bit. So if you wanted to get a little crazy or a little, you know, custom with your grid lines and grid patterns, all right, you can do that here and kind of rotate the angles of your grids themselves. All right, I'm going to keep it at 0. Put them back up there. All right, offset basically just tells Revit to push this one side or the other. So if you wanted, instead of starting directly where you've told it to, if you want it to offset itself, you know, 6 inches one way and then start, or 6 inches the other way and then start, that's what that offset value is going to be for. All right, and the same is going to go for your vertical grid here as well, or your horizontal grid rather. All right, the same settings. The same is going to go. Beginning is basically the bottom of your wall. You know, end is going to be the top of your wall, and so on. Okay. So that's how you can kind of change around those justification patterns and you know, your grid patterns. Okay. So that's how you can kind of make a typical default, you know, curtain wall system, right? Is you set up you know, the settings in the type properties, all right, change the instance properties up a bit if you want, right? Again, the same goes for the type properties on a curtain wall as it does on the regular wall or your doors and windows. If you change up anything in the type properties, make sure you know to duplicate it, all right, so you don't mess up any of the other curtain walls you may have modeled. Okay. You know, so again, you're not playing around with any of the defaults. All right. Now, a couple of the different things here with your curtain wall that you can do, right, is I'm just going to maximize this so it's a little bit easier to see. Right. I'm going to work in a 3D view. Is when you have kind of a you know, a regular curtain wall like this, all right, and these are the default grid lines that you add in here. right? There's obviously ways that you can go and customize this a little bit more from the default, right? So let's say, this one big panel here, you actually wanted to only split this one into two, right? You wanted to go and add a couple more, grid lines in here and a couple more mullions to make it a little bit more fancy, a little more of a customizable design, right? If you go to the architecture tab, you'll notice that you have these tools here for curtain grid and mullion. Okay, so if you click on curtain grid, for example, right, this tool allows you to add more grids into this wall. Okay, so the grids that are placed here now, these are kind of your default, right? But you're allowed and you're able to add additional grids and additional mullions in here. Okay, so clicking on that curtain grid tool, right, before we click and add mullions in here, alright, is you'll notice that in the modify tab for placement is you have the three options, alright, is you have, you have all segments, right, you have one segment, and you have all except picked, alright. So the differences between the three, right, is where it says all segments here, alright, basically means if you go and let me hover across one of my vertical mullions like this, and it'll show this dashed line for where it's adding this horizontal grid line, or if you hover over one of your vertical ones, or your horizontal ones rather, it will add a vertical grid for you, okay? But what all segments means is that if I click and add this right here, okay, with all segments selected, it goes and adds a grid line and mullions all the way across the entire thing until it gets to the end of the wall, okay? That's what the all segments does. If you select one segment, alright, as you can see, that dashed line doesn't go all the way across. It only goes for that one single segment you're in here. So instead of going with all segments and it's showing the dashed line all the way down the whole thing, if you select one segment, alright, it allows you to go and add a mullion just in that one segment, okay? So again, if you only want it in one certain area, one segment's the way to go, okay? Now the last one here, all except picked, is just like it suggests, if you go and select where this grid line is here, right? Now you have this red line across. If you go and select areas, all right, like these, all right, now they're dashed lines, all right? If you go and select it and click off, all right, to place it, you can see that those areas that I picked, all right, don't get the grid lines, or don't get the mullions rather, but the areas that I didn't click off, they do get the mullions, okay? So the three different ways that you can add different curtain grids or additional curtain grids and mullions to a curtain wall, all right? And you can use them either by all segments, one segment, or all except picked, okay? Now aside from just adding new curtain grids here, all right, you can go and individually select different pieces of this wall, okay? So what's unique about a curtain wall as well is that not only is this, able to be selected as a full curtain wall in and of itself, all right, but you're actually also able to select each one of these mullions individually. You're also able to select each one of these curtain panels individually, right, as well as the grid lines, all right? And by doing that, is you can adjust just this one single mullion or just this one single panel and things of that nature, okay? So what you can do is, let's say we wanted to change this single mullion here, right? Instead of going and having this mullion come all the way down, we actually wanted to get rid of this section of mullion, okay? What you can do is, if you bring your mouse over this mullion, right, is you might be able, depending on how far zoomed in you are, you might be able to highlight just that mullion, all right, and you'll be able to click and select it. But a lot of times, depending on how far out you're zoomed, okay, is you might not be able to get, just that single mullion, okay. So what you can do is, when you have multiple objects in a small area like this, all right, and you can't really get to select the one single object that you want to do, right, is if you bring your mouse towards the area where the objects are, right, and if you kind of leave your mouse there to hover and tap your tab key, all right, on your keyboard, you'll notice that it actually cycles through all of the different objects in that area, Alright, so I'm keeping my mouse in one spot and not moving it. Alright, and I'm just hitting the tab key right now. And what that's doing is cycling through all of the different objects in this spot. Alright, so I'm cycling through. We can see, okay, now it's highlighting, this mullion. Okay, and aside from just highlighting it, if you look when you have these highlighted down in the bottom left corner here of your screen, is it will actually tell you the object that you're highlighting at the moment. So right now, if we hit tab, right, it looks like that mullion's highlighted. And if you look in the bottom left corner, you can see that it says, okay, rectangular mullion is highlighted, right? So if we select it, we know that we're selecting that mullion. Okay. In the same way that we select that mullion, if we go through and kind of come towards the edge of one of our panels and kind of hit tab, right, you can see that you can highlight one of these panels as well, right? So if you wanted to switch out these panels. Okay. So if we selected, all right, this mullion here is what we're going for. So either tab through or hover over it to select it. Okay. You'll notice that by default, all right, most of your mullions will have this little pin associated with it. Okay. You'll also notice while that pin is there, is that you can't use the type selector and you can't change or edit this mullion at all. Right? That's because that pin, basically what it does is it locks it in place and it locks you from being able to change any of the settings with it. Okay, so because this is one of the default mullions that got placed, it locks it in place, all right, and prevents you from changing it. If we want to change it, which is what we do want to do, all right, you can click the pin, right, and that unpins it, and you'll notice now in your type selector box, you can actually go and adjust this. So if you wanted to change the mullion to a different size or something like that, you could, and basically it's going to change just this one single mullion. Okay. Alternately, if you wanted to delete it, all right, you'll have to unpin it, and you can delete it. Okay. But when you're going for something like this with deleting mullions, okay, is you can select a mullion, you can unpin it, and then click, push the delete button on your keyboard. All right, and that will delete the mullion, and you'll see that the mullion's now gone. Okay, but what it does is if you just select a mullion and delete it, right, you'll notice that you still get the line here from the grid through the glass. So this isn't read as one single piece of glass, it's read as actually two panels still. It's just you don't have a mullion sitting here, right, which maybe is what you want to do, but in this case is we don't want to do that. We want to make this one big solid piece of glass, right, as opposed to two different pieces of glass that doesn't have a mullion in between. Okay, so I'm going to go and hit undo, right, so that's going to put that mullion back. All right, and so what I'm going to do is, if I'm using my tab key, is I'm going to bring it here and tab through until you can see that you highlight this grid line here. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see that it's highlighted, right, but if you look in the bottom left right now, right, you'll see that I have that grid line highlighted. So if I click and select it, all right, as you'll see we have our grid line actually selected. Okay, and when you select one of your grid lines, what you're able to do is you'll notice on the top you have add or remove segments. So if you select your grid line and choose add or remove segments, if you click on that, you can now choose, let's say this section here, right? We're going to click on this section of grid line, and it actually removes that segment altogether. So now not only did it take the mullion away, it took that segment of the grid line away, and so this now reads as one big solid piece of glass, and we don't have that break in between as we did before when we just kind of deleted that mullion out of there. All right, so there's a couple different methods on how you can do that. It depends on how you want the wall to look. All right, but that's basically how you can do that. If we wanted to add it back in, you can select that grid line again, select the same tool, add or remove segments, and you can click on that area, right, and that'll add that segment back in for you. Okay, whether or not it adds the mullion back in. Okay, there we go, so it adds that segment back in. And if it doesn't add the mullion, you can always click on the mullion tool here under architecture tab and add that mullion back in for yourself. Okay, and so that's how you can kind of go and start to modify, right, the layout of these grids. Right, so again, I would recommend, if you're going to do sort of a custom pattern of mullions and so on, is build the default kind of pattern first. That's going to be close to what you're looking for. right? And then kind of go through and add some additional grid lines in here, add some additional mullions, okay? And that way you have something to work off of instead of just working completely off of scratch.